So we're going to see the flood tide for the first race in the Big Rock Regatta this year is what it looks like based on the tide charts and the current information. So a couple things we want to talk about are the deep water channel that goes through here and this choke point right here. There's a deep choke point as the channel's naturally weathered and eroded and gotten really deep right here, and a lot of water has got to funnel through this point all at once. And then it's shallower over here on the sides, okay? Shallower over here, and see the red and green buoys? I'm not sure if I got them on the right side, but that's where the channel is, okay? Where the commercial and recreational traffic goes, so that's the deepest part. That's where you're going to see the fastest and most amount of current. But because of this barrier here, this breakwater barrier and this breakwater barrier and all the geographic features of this little square here that we're sailing inside of, we end up getting these whirlpool kind of eddy effects around here. Because if the current all goes this way, we end up with a vacuum of space here, right? Where there's just nothing here. We can end up with a low pressure zone of water here because all of this is flooding through, sucking away, and opening up kind of a low pressure vacuum. So this naturally sucks water towards this area, which is what kind of starts this eddy effect to curve around, and the same thing going on over here. So as we go through the day, as we progress through the day, the tide's going to top out, and when the tide tops out, we're going to start to transition from the flood current to the slack tide current. Okay, so it's going to get a little weaker. Okay, so see how big, strong current, and then, whoops, it's going to die down, and it'll still be going in as we approach the slack tide, but it'll slow down, okay? And this circulating eddy here will start to die down, and I think we're just going to see water kind of sloshing back and forth from side to side, and it'll probably be almost inconsequential as far as your race strategy. Maybe you'll be able to pick up some boats if you figure some things out, but on the slack tide, you're only going to pass boats by playing the current if you're super observant and you really dial into what's going on, because not that much is going to be going on with the current. It's almost not going to be a factor, but you still want to pay attention to it and get as much information as you can. Do your research and try and figure out exactly what the current's doing. Okay, then we're going to get to just slack tide where there's almost no current. Okay, the only current at this point, when we're in between the high and the low tide, the incoming and the outgoing current is going to just be these natural kind of pulses, right? Because the water is going to bottleneck up here, and similar to water pulsing out the top of a water bottle or something like that, it'll likely kind of just pulse back and forth and just send these kind of shock waves of current back and forth, and those are going to be small and subtle and not noticeable and probably won't play an effect. And that's kind of just me speculating as well. I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen, but the point is, in the transition in the slack tide time period, the current's going to be less of a factor in your race strategy. Okay, so this is starting to transition from the slack tide to the ebb tide. So we started at flood tide, we've got to slack tide, now it's going from slack tide to an ebb tide. Okay, so the tide outside is starting to drop. Okay, the ocean level is starting to drop out here, and as the ocean level starts to drop, the water naturally has to flow out of this inlet. So you're going to see it start to ebb first, probably right at the harbor mouth. You'll see if you drop your sunscreen in the water at this channel mark right here, you'll start to see it, or this channel mark right here, you'll start to see it get pulled this direction, and that'll signify the start of the ebb. Okay, so as you kind of watch for that and watch to see it happen. So notice not a lot of current here, but we see the pattern starting. So notice these arrows here. I drew kind of like the natural tendency is for the water in all of these areas to be pulled toward the harbor entrance, right? But in this corner, if all the water gets pulled out and towards the harbor entrance, it's going to leave a low pressure vacuum, right? There's going to be nothing there, so it's going to have to fill up again, and that's why we get this reverse circulating current that goes through this way, and this one over here, this reverse circulating current starting to go through this way, and that's what's going to start to create the eddies that we're going to see. Okay, so there's full ebb tide in effect. Currents ripping through the channel, spinning around, eddying on both sides. In this ebb tide here, if our race course is right here, if this is our start line and this is our weather mark, which is about where they place it, If you nail the boat end, win the boat end, and bang the right corner and get sent out into this river and come screaming in with the current on starboard tack on the ley line straight to the weather mark, you'll be launched on the guys around you. And then stick to the rocks going downwind to the leeward mark, and you'll have the most current pushing you there. So you want to kind of play this whirlpool all the way around the course, right? The guys who start at the pin and sail into this adverse current are going to get pushed backwards. Okay, and then in the flood tide here, now the current's going the opposite direction. We have the opposite effect, where if you go out into the right side of the course, if you sail out into the channel here, you're going to get sucked down current all the way back to the yacht club, and we'll meet you at the dock. But if you bang the left side of the course, you're going to get right on this treadmill. It's going to take you right to the weather mark in half a second. So I've seen races canceled at this regatta before, where half the fleet went left and got around the weather mark, and half the fleet went right, and then the wind died, and they got literally sucked like almost to this point right here. They start getting farther away from the weather mark than they were at the starting line when they get stuck out in this really strong flood current. This flood's usually really strong relative to the ebb. So something that's often overlooked with tide charts and the way that the tide moves up and down is that the rate of change is not constant, okay? If this graph was straight diagonal lines from this point, a straight line to this point right here, that would represent a constant rate of change, where the tide is going up and down at the same kind of speed the whole time. What this curve indicates here is it kind of flattens out right here, right? And it's not moving up and like it's moving horizontally more than it's moving vertically. The points on the chart, right? But in this part of the chart here, the points are moving vertically more than horizontally. So what's that signifying is that at the peaks and at the troughs, things are changing slower, things are changing less, and we're getting, that's when we're seeing the slack tides and less current, okay? And in between the tide change, that's when things are going to happen really fast. So tides don't go up and down at a constant rate. They go to high tide, and then they hang out at high tide for like 2.5 hours without a lot of change taking place, and then they'll start to change fast, and they'll have like a 3.5-4 hour period where they're rapidly changing and things are changing quick, and then they'll bottom out again in the low tide, and we'll have like a 2-hour period from 5, 6, 7, 8, okay, so like a 3-hour period where not too much happens, and it's just kind of low tide and we don't see things moving. But then in this next 3-hour period, we see a big change, a rapid rate of change, right? So what does this mean for your race strategy and your tactics? It means that at the peaks and the troughs, at the high tide and the low tide, when things aren't changing too much, that's when we're going to see slack tide. That's when we're going to see not a lot of current. That's when things are going to be kind of mellowed out as far as how much water is moving. And your tactics and your strategy are going to be based on the wind observations that you make with your pre-start research, right? More based on the starting line skew, the course skew, the fleet psychology, how to get a good start in a big crowded line with a short weather beat, okay, because that's kind of the tradition at this regatta. Really chaotic, risky, crowded, short course racing. So on the peaks and the troughs, it's going to be a conservative game plan where you get a good start and you play the wind and try and get the shifts to the weather mark, and you kind of forget about the current, okay? However, when we're halfway in between high tide and low tide, or low tide and high tide, that's when the current's moving fast, okay? And that's when the tide's going up and down the most, and so we see a strong flood tide or a strong ebb tide, depending on what the situation is. So here, when the tide's going down, when the tide's lowering, we're going to see an ebb, and we're going to see the right side of the course favored, right? Okay, so here's the ebb tide. So if you start here, tack out to the right, you get sucked in this river, and you get sucked around right to the weather mark. If you were to go left on the ebb, you get in this adverse current. Now, when the tide's rising, okay, as it is here, and when the flood's starting, that's when you're going to see the left side of the course favored, okay? So when the current's coming in, the tide's rising, it's circulating this way, you want to bang start at the pin end, bang the left side, get on this treadmill, it's going to take you straight to the weather mark. And like I was saying, y'all, I've seen kids get sucked to the yacht club when they try to bang the right side of the course in this situation. This chart here, we're seeing 12 o'clock, right? First start Saturday is probably going to be right around 12 o'clock. So that's probably actually more closer to the wind-based plan than the current-based plan. I'm thinking, though, that the current will follow the tides by like an hour. The current will not keep up with this tide chart. The current, I think, will lag an hour behind this tide chart because there's resistance in the harbor, and it will take some time for the current to flow in and out. And so it will take a little bit of time for the current to catch up. So I think we'll still be in a current-based left-favored phase at the start of the race at 12 o'clock. But as the next hour wears on, we're going to see the current start to die, and we're going to start to think in terms of the wind and in terms of the fleet and in terms of the start line and in terms of the course more when we're making our tactics and our strategy. Okay, and then towards the end of the day, around, if we race until 4 o'clock, at 4 o'clock we're going to be in the middle of the ebb tide with the tide dropping and the water flowing out. Okay, in which case we're going to be wanting to bang the right side of the course, right? So that's when we want to watch, we want to be throwing our sunscreen in the water at the harbor mouth, and when we start to see it get sucked out to sea, that's how we start knowing the right side of the course is going to be favored very, very heavily by the current, okay? And then if we were to race until 7:30 at night, then you would start basing your strategy and your tactics based off of the wind again, okay? So this is going into Sunday night. It's going to be super high tide early, at like 1:30 in the morning, at 2 in the morning, and then we're going to pretty much see this same pattern repeat itself again on Sunday, but maybe in an hour delayed. So we'll see this current-based left-favored phase will start an hour earlier and last an hour long. We'll get an hour more racing in this current-based left-favored phase before the wind-based plan starts to kick in, probably around at 3 o'clock on Sunday. Okay, because tide cycles are like 23 hours long or whatever it is. They're an hour off of the time of the day, the length of a day. So start racing at 12 on Saturday. Current-based strategy, expect the left side of the course to be strongly favored. Okay, because this is what the current's going to be doing. Hit the pin, bang the left. Okay, go through the day. Wind-based, forget about the current as we get to 1:30, 2 o'clock. End of the day, you're thinking about the ebb tide starting, and then suddenly you're banging the right, okay? And then same thing pretty much on Sunday. Sunday we're going to start out, probably first race, we're going to see this on Sunday. As we go through the day, we're probably going to see this towards the end of the first race, the start of the second race. We're going to see it go slack, maybe around the third race, around 2 o'clock, 2:15, we're going to see the slack tide. Then we're going to start to see it transition to the ebb tide. And then probably the last races of the day on Sunday, maybe in a strong ebb tide. I think they'll probably be in a more still in this transition phase. I don't think we'll get to this full ebb phase. That'll probably happen a little bit like right after racing, but at least we have a general idea. So do our pre-start research and watch for it. They're going to be on a short, crowded race course this weekend where the starting line is going to be almost as long as the first beat of the race. In that situation, the simple fact of the matter is that you're going to get messed up real bad. You're going to get in some tough situations that you're not going to handle right, or you will handle right, and someone's going to foul you, and you're going to get put from first to 20th or first to last real fast. So whoever's able to handle that in the most objective, emotionless, logical, rational, clear-minded, level-headed manner, and stay focused and present in the moment and reacting in the best possible way and trying to grind back one boat at a time to the best place you can get to, that's going to be the person who wins this regatta. So we talked about Sarah and Mark winning Lido Nationals in that fashion. Sailing coaches at Cal Yacht Club back in the day were playing paddle tennis one time, and one of my coaches was over aggressive, and he was trying to win on every strike. He was trying to spike the ball and hit it super hard and super fast, and the result was he kept hitting the net and he kept hitting the ball out of bounds. And the other coach was kicking his butt. And then he changed his strategy to where he wasn't trying to spike the ball. All he tried to do was return every shot. He just tried to return every shot, and when he focused on returning every shot, he started to win. The other guy started to make mistakes. So I think that's the goal in a crowded, chaotic fleet. Just sail around the buoys. Just get off the line in a good start. Don't try for a great start, try for a good start and sail around the buoys, okay? Don't try to spike the ball, don't try to win the race, just return every shot. That's what you got to do.